Hi, I'm Andy Davis and I'd like to welcome you to this E3D tutorial on creating tileable textures in ZBrush. I'm going to go through the whole process of how to create tileable textures within ZBrush using pre-made assets. We're going to start off with a non-tiled dirt mesh that I make tileable, which is the texture you see here. I'm going to show you how to create a diffuse, a normal, spec popper, how to render the texture that you've created in xNormal, how to get a displacement map out, and how to render ambient occlusion in ZBrush. I'm going to show you how to turn the displacement into a tileable mesh, which you can see here. So you can export it into things like xNormal and bake out any other maps that you might need. This is the final result after a bit of texture work. It looks pretty convincing, and I hope you enjoy the tutorial. Okay, so the first thing we want to do is change our document size and make sure constraint proportions is off, and I'm going to use 2048 and then hit resize and then zoom out, and it's got your nice square canvas here. Then we want to load up our earth, so just navigate and then load up that and drag it into the canvas, pressing shift to constrain it. And then we want to frame, which will frame the mesh to the borders. We want to change to a flat colour. You can see we've got a texture already applied to that, but it's not tileable. The way to tile a mesh in ZBrush is to hold down the tilde key or the at key if you're on a UK keyboard. Now if you drop the mesh to the canvas and then go to the MRGZB grabber and then drag an outline, and make sure auto crop's off, and then drag an outline, and as you can see here there's a massive seam in the middle, so we need to get rid of that seam in order to make the mesh tileable. So the way to do that is to drag your mesh back onto the canvas and then frame it again, and then drop the mesh to the canvas and grab the MRGBZ grabber again with auto crop off, and then marquee select around the entire border, and then you want to export the depth grab. We want to call it E3D rubble tile, and we want to open that up in Photoshop. Now you want to make this the same as you'd make a tileable texture. I'm going to use the same technique that Ricky used in the Next Gen Texture and TVD. And to do that, you select the bottom layer, duplicate it, and then offset by 1024, and then put a mask on the top layer and fill that mask with black. And then you want to group the layers. I'm going to call it base, just for organisation. Then you want to select the mask, and then select a nice soft brush. And the first thing you want to do is get rid of the seam as quickly as possible. At this stage, don't worry about it being visible. We can blend it out later. We're going to increase our brush size a little bit and try and blend it a little bit more. It's best to use a soft brush in this because it blends much better because you're using a height map. If it was a texture, you'd probably want to use a much harsher brush. And the best way to check if it's tileable or not is to Control-A, Control-Shift-C and then paste, and then offset the canvas. And you see we've got these little seams here, but you can use these healing brush to get rid of those. The healing brush does a really good job for things like this. And there's still a slight problem there, but it's nothing too bad. You can usually get this done in a couple of passes. And that's looking pretty good. We want to save it. We want to call it E3D rubble tile base. And then we want to merge the current document. And then save it as E3D rubble tile. This will be the texture that we're going to import back into ZBrush to use as our displacement map. So you want to make a new document, and then we want to grab a plane and make it a polymesh 3D and drag it into the canvas. and put the red wax back on there. And we want to import our rubble tile displacement that we just created. Just frame it to the canvas there. Then go to geometry, make sure smooth is off, and then divide it up to about 4 million polys. And then we need to make a UV map. You want a 2048. You need to go into the lowest subdivision level, and reduce the border size to 0, and then UV planar. And then bring the subdivision level back up to the highest. Make a new texture map. So just apply that. And you see we've got a nice tileable mesh there. And I just want to frame it back into view and just import our dirt texture. We want to change to flat colour and then just put texture over. Go to Polypaint, make sure that mRGB is on, and then click Polypaint from texture, and that will transfer the texture from the texture map into Polypaint. And then you want to save that. I'm going to call it Rubble Dirt Tile. If we drop it to our canvas, we can see that it's perfectly tiled now. Go to the mRGB ZBrush again, and marquee select the canvas, and you can see there's no tile there, so everything's good. So you want to redraw it back onto our canvas, and then make sure your textures and alpha's off. Okay, the next thing we want to do is we want to import all our rubble pieces. So you need to drop this to the canvas, and then go over to Load Tool and navigate to all the parts that we've created. Click Open, and that'll import everything in there. Okay, it's usually best to start with something pretty big. I'm going to start off with the medium concrete block here because it's got a rebar in it, and it'll give me a good scale when I start placing other things. So you just drag that onto the canvas, and then you can just go to Move by pressing W, and then just dragging up and down in the canvas will change the height of the mesh. And you can rotate by pressing R, and just rotate it how you like. Okay, and then press T twice to ensure that's dropped to the canvas. If you don't do this, it will swap the object over for the next object you select. And then I'm going to drag out a piece of breeze block here. And then you're going to drag out another one. Basically, you want to try and fill up as much space as you can here, changing the height and getting as much variety as you can. And you can switch between move, scale and rotate as many times as you want, but if you press T and go into edit mode, then you get the transform widgets. But once you do that, you can't change the height of the mesh, so be very careful when you do this. Throw a bit of colour into the scene. Make sure you try and keep the same scale for your objects as well, because if there's anything obviously different, then it'll look strange. But you don't want anything that's laying on top of the earth. You want something that is so it looks like it's embedded. And try and stay away from the corners if you can, because if you go over the borders of the canvas, then it won't tile correctly. Okay, just keep on dragging parts into the scene, and make sure you offset the canvas regularly. Okay, looks pretty good. I'm going to try and add another concrete block here, but from a different side. Get the scale so it matches the one that we previously dropped. We grab a bit of the pipe here, get some variance into the scene. We grab some rebar and draw that and try and match the scale with the rebar that's on the concrete. Don't be afraid to rotate them around if you feel you need to. Again, I'm just going to draw this transformer piece in and sink it into the earth. You don't want anything sticking out too far if you can help it. I mean, something like this would usually be used as just a ground texture. You'd usually have like actual rubble meshes on top of it. Okay, I'm going to grab one of these fence pieces here and offset my canvas. And I'm going to find a space that looks pretty good and then drag it into the canvas. Just move it out of the way of that a little bit. That looks pretty good. Try best not to get intersections, but if you do get a little, then it's not so bad. You know, you're most likely going to have meshes on top of this anyway, so no one will really notice. When the scene gets quite full like this, it can be tricky to find spaces to put things. But don't let it put you off. I mean, this is a rubble pile, so it's not supposed to look super neat. I think we're ready to capture our texture now, so you need to make sure no objects are selected. I need to go over to the RGB grabber, and this captures your texture, your depth pass. So select that, make sure auto crops off, and then as we showed before, border select the entire canvas, which will give you a depth grab of your scene and a diffuse map. And then you want to export those out. You go over to Bakes and I'm going to call it E3D Rubble Tile Disp for displacement and save that. And then go to the Diffuse and do the same. Now the next thing we want to do is capture our normal map from this. So select the simple brush icon again and go to Material. I've actually downloaded the AL normal map. The normal map RGB mat that's included with ZBrush is a little bit strong. See, the normal's very bright, and so you can download the AL normal map from the Pixologic website. Click texture and then grab doc, and then you want to export that. I'm going to call it E3D Rubble Tile Normal. Now the next thing we want to do is we want to try and capture an ambient occlusion. Now as it stands, you can try and use a matte cap white, but unfortunately it seems to be directional. It's not very ambient, which is no good. So to do this, we need to create a mesh from the displacement that we've got. Now that'll be fine because the displacement is projected as the camera faces, so you'll get lots of striations and jagged lines and things like that if you rotate the mesh, but it'll capture fine for a texture like this. So we need to click the simple brush, go to the plane and drag that onto the canvas, make it a polymesh 3D. Then we want to go to our geometry panel, click smooth off, and then divide that a bunch of times. So about 4 million polys. And then make sure our low subdivision level's on, and then go to UV map, map border down and click UV planar. And we need to create a new texture map. We need to bring our subdivision levels up. And go to our displacement map and then load the displacement that we've just exported. I'm going to bring the intensity down to 0.2 and then apply the displacement. And as you can see, you get these striations I was talking about where the geometry is stretched. But from a top view you can't see any of that, so it's not a problem. Now to render the ambient occlusion map we need to go onto a plain white flat colour material, and then we need to drag our tool palette all the way down. Then we go to render and then drag the render tab over. And we want to take the subpixels, leave that about 3 if we can. And then select ambient occlusion, go to the ambient occlusion, BPR AO, and you want to chuck the rays up as high as you can, and the angle about 150. And then put the resolution to 8192 if your PC can handle it. If it can't, then use something lower, and then just click BPR, and this will render out our ambient occlusion. And there's our ambient occlusion. We want to go to texture, and then click grab doc. And export it as a3D rubble tile AO ZBrush and save. And the good thing about having a mesh like this is that you can capture any of the other materials. So a good one to use is the Framer one, which can be used as a spec popper map. I'm just going to call it a3D rubble tile spec popper. Now I want to export this as an OBJ so we can use it to render ambient occlusion in xNormal as well. This is just to show that you can use a mesh that's projected directly from the top. So we're going to call that a3D rubble tile high poly and just save. Okay, just want to import our a3D rubble tile OBJ that we just exported, because I want to set up a low poly plane that we can use to project onto. So once that's imported, we just need to grab a plane again and make it polymesh 3D, drag it onto the canvas and frame it, and then go to UV map, reduce the UV map border and give it a 2048 map and UV planar again. We want to select our a3D rubble tile high poly and center it to the canvas and frame. And then in our subtool tab we want to append the plane to that subtool. And make sure the plane's selected, and then rotate the model upwards, and then hit move, and then use the widget to drag the plane upwards. It can be slightly hard to see, so you're going to have to guess. It looks like it should be about right. Yeah, that's fine. And then select the high poly and delete it. Now you want to export this plane as the a3D rubble tile low poly. I'm just going to drag the high poly into the high definition slot, and then the low poly into the low definition slot. Just assign a name. Let's call it a3D rubble tile, and then just make sure the occlusion set up something like this. And then just click generate maps. If you want to learn more about xNormal, we've got a tutorial over in the free section that you can have a look at that goes over xNormal in much more detail than I'm showing now. Once that's rendered, you can see we've got a pretty nice map there, lots of detail. It'll be perfect for texturing. Open up Photoshop here and just close the map that we've got. We go to our textures and then just have a look at all of what we've created. Drag them into Photoshop. We've got an AO, a spec popper, an ambient occlusion which we'll have to rotate, a normal, a displacement, and a diffuse, all from meshes created in ZBrush. Okay, this is the final result that we've got shown in Marmoset here. You can see it looks pretty convincing. There's lots of detail and the normals have picked up really well. I spent a few minutes just creating a set of textures for this, all based off the textures we made. We've got a displacement, and then we've just got the ambient occlusion there over a plain diffuse. Then we've just got a basic hue and saturation, levels for the metal, the spec popper, and the ambient occlusion for the specular. And then we've got our normal map, which has just got a crazy bump pass that I made from just a grayscale copy of the diffuse, which I've overlaid over, removed the blue channel. As you can see, it looks pretty nice, everything's showing up very well. Now, this is all projected onto a flat plane. There's no geometry really, so you can see this is a very effective way to make some textures very quickly. It's not just limited to rubble, you can make pretty much anything you'd like. And another cool thing you can do with the displacement map is to use tessellation in Marmoset and in UDK. And that gives us a little bit of displacement. There's a couple of errors, but I think generally it looks pretty good. So you can get some nice shadows from that if you use displacement. And you can use ambient occlusion as well. It's all looking pretty good. So thanks for watching, and I hope you've enjoyed this tutorial. I hope you find the techniques useful. I can't wait to see what you make with it. Post some stuff on the forums and show me, and I'll get back to you.